Welcome to Connect, Curate, Create, where we're on a journey through the arts and creative industries. I'm your host, Dr. Tim Butcher. If you're anything like me, you love learning about art and creativity. In each episode, I ask artists and creatives how they navigate life, work, and more besides. They generously share their stories and offer invaluable insights that you and I can put into action. As the author of Creative Work Beyond Precarity, I blend my mission to give artists a fair go with my academic smarts, to ask the questions that draw out lessons we can all learn from.
Most people in Australia don't realise that we are almost completely government-supported, philanthropic-supported industry. We, on the whole, don't make a whole lot of money. And as artists, we definitely don't make the money. Nobody knows what to do to get the book published after you've written it, or the process that you have to go through. So doing that kind of education to me is extremely valuable, because I know that myself, I did not know the how to. So I love imparting the how to people. I'm very cognizant of this is this moment. And this won't be this moment forever. So I do what I can in this moment, and I'm quite happy and content to get back to me later.
In this episode, I talk with Chris Donoghue, a multidisciplinary artist based in Campbelltown, New South Wales, and the Media and Communications Manager for hART. Chris shares a journey from hip-hop dance in her teens through university studies to being a leading voice bringing African-American arts to the fore in Australia. She offers keen insights into empowering young people to find their voice through creativity, the vitalities of community and collaboration, and decolonising the arts. Be sure to check out the show notes for highlights and links that you can use to shape your own journey. And if you enjoy this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell your friends about Connect, Curate, Create. So today is our first remote recording. So a bit of an experiment, and I've already had some technical issues. And I'm here with the very patient, very kind Chris Donoghue, who is a multidisciplinary artist based in New South Wales. I'm here in Tassie, in Lutruwita, and should pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and apologise for the dog barking in the background. But anyway, Chris, welcome.
Hi, how are you doing? I love the dog in the background. You should make it part of your intro.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, you never know. We might get some free kibble out of it. But Yeah. Look, Chris. Yeah. Thanks for joining me today. It's we met recently for the first time and had a really great chat over Google Meet, and I just really thought there's so much we can explore around your practice, around the work you do in the arts, and I'm sure there's plenty that our listeners could learn from you. So I suppose perhaps what would be really great to kick us off, you're a multidisciplinary artist. What does that mean to you?
So I was one of those bizarre children, as most of us were, whether we were sort of pushed down or not. And so I was an avid writer from probably age 6 when I started writing poetry, and I used to dance all over the place. So I still kept on dancing, and discovered a love for acting when I was in high school. So I've always had a creative practice. It's always come out in all sorts of different ways, and I don't like to be limited by genre. And in my later life, when I did university education, that became even more apparent that sometimes expression needs to take whatever form it needs to take. And so therefore, I guess multidisciplinary just for me means whatever expression this particular spirit decides to take. So I've worked as an actor, I've worked as a singer, I've written on albums, I've edited books, I've done all kinds of things. So whatever suits the moment, I guess.
And so the moment, is it sort of, say if you are commissioned to do some work, or to make some art, or you are thinking about making some art, or you get a sensation, a feeling that I need to do some work on this. How sort of planned is it, or is it just spontaneous in the moment? This is the medium I will use. How do you approach it?
Well, for me, I'm still very much. I've had difficulty in life generally in terms of raising children and all of those things. So very much life sort of dictates what I have, the sort of boundaries of what I've been able to work within. So growing up, I got opportunities to work in dance. So that's what I took, even though I was trying to be an actor at the time. I'm African American and white Australian, so racially it was quite a difficult space to work in. And although I was trying to work as an actor, I kept on getting, sort of interpolated towards dance and this box that the arts industry in Sydney at the time had. So these days I've recognised more what an artist can actually do in terms of having an idea and following through with that idea. So I've tended to look at what's there at the moment and support and gather with other people that are already doing those things, if that makes sense. So it becomes more of a cooperative or a community-based work.
Yeah, sure. So community is really important to you. It's important to your practice to collaborate, to draw on their inspiration, their ideas, to be part of a conversation, perhaps. That's the sense I get from our previous conversation.
Yeah. So, I mean, for instance, when I was 17 and 18 and landed in Sydney, I was highly starved for sort of Black culture. And so I very drawn to R&B and hip hop and singing, and so it was very much the sort of niche, what they deemed a subculture in Sydney. That was not a subculture in much of the world, but it was here. And my partner at the time was and still is, a really well-known hip hop dancer, and so with us joining together, we managed to make a huge sort of community movement at the time, starting dance schools in Sydney, starting street dancing. Like street dancing has always been around, but we started things like crump circles. That was new. So, and it became a place where sort of displaced youth tended to gravitate towards the spaces that we inhabited. And so I started putting on huge events for, just young people on, we took over Waterloo Oval and put up stages and got sponsors. It tended to be really grassroots, kind of what has now turned into festival-sized events. But at the time, it was just really, we've got this really good idea. Let's put something on and the people will come, which they did on no money. It had no money attached to it. So it's been very, it was part of my own discovery of my own culture. At the same time as joining with other unseen cultures around Sydney. They kind of found a home in both the clubs and out on the street. So that was kind of the work that I was doing. And it's like a falling into it. I've always been a really, you know, a lot of people hate the word organic, but sometimes there's no better word than just organically. These careers and these pathways kind of came to me and I followed them and had a wild experience while I was doing it and learnt lots of skills on the ground just because that's what needed to be done.
Yeah, and so in your own search for your own cultural references, you've also enabled others to go in search of their own. You made space for others. And in that that's a space for empowerment.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've found a really funny thing throughout life is you have doers, and I've found that I'm a doer. So quite often you'll find 2 or 3 doers at the center of every great project and lots of people with lots of ideas or needs that are willing to or looking for a place to be or looking for a place to express those needs. I think of it like a river, you know, all sort of little trickles of water eventually find their way to the river. And so I'm down the bottom digging out the river. So all these little trickles of water can come and join together. And that's what they've done. And a lot of them are still going. Like a lot of them are still at the core of sort of hip hop and ironically, they've found a place in some of the high arts institutions around Sydney and the world I've seen. But we all started together in the hip hop clubs in Sydney. So it's been quite, and interestingly, there's a strong community outreach element to all of their work as they recognise what it is to be unseen. And mentoring is part of their practice. And I think it's probably because culturally, that's kind of what we've been taught from our forefathers. It's very embodied within all of our practice.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And so, as an embodied practice, there's a lot, I guess, that goes unsaid in those interactions within the space. You don't need to say a lot. You can, there's a shared feeling. There's a through dance. You can communicate. I'm not a dancer, so that would be my very limited understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Even these days, even though I'm not deep in the, my age and my sort of a journey has taken me away from that kind of space, but I'm not completely disconnected from it. So even when I speak to my former partner and a lot of people that I used to be connected with that sometimes are still in those spaces or have taken what we used to do and they're now in fine art spaces. So I cross paths with them quite often. It's still very much the same thing where there's an understanding between people who are considered marginalised. There's an understanding of each other's experience that is not usually spoken about, although I've noticed during recent years that we're getting more skilled at speaking about it and finding words for it, and which is important in terms of being able to communicate it to other people outside of your circle. But I've noticed that, that's part of the comfort of these communal groups is that there is an unspoken understanding of each other's experience, and therefore there is understanding of the kind of practice that's going on between like each other's practice. There's more depth or more nuanced understanding, I think, between people within those groups.
Listening, isn't it? I suppose, something I learned from working with a community group a few years ago is the importance of listening. You don't actually have to say much or ask lots of questions, unless you're podcasting, of course. But to actually to make the space so that to listen and to see how others, and that those, and through those shared understandings, you feel you're not alone. You have you have cultural reference points, which then can take out into the world. And what you said about how how hip hop now inhabits cultural institutions and many spaces, and there has been this huge sort of globally, looking back on where hip hop comes from and its own references and the importance that hip hop's played in global culture and continues to. I think we're only now really starting to understand the huge significance of that particular practice in the world today.
Yeah, absolutely. There's only one woman, I think, in Australia who has actually done the work for us in terms of the academic sort of quantifying what that has meant within our communities. So there's probably a whole lot more room to do more work about that. But it can't be undersold. And even looking at the roles that it plays in First Nations communities around Australia as well. Yeah. And to me, it's magnificent if you think about, like, I went to this Juneteenth event in Sydney and met all these amazing African-American women who had been living here for like 40 plus years, working in the entertainment industry. So there was film directors and writers and dancers who had been at the start of like NASDA College. And I had never heard of these women, but all of them had come over around the same time and had been part of the Black Power movement that had been standing up for First Nations people and had joined the ride and had been living in the tent embassies. And so it was really interesting to listen to their stories and then look at the way that that hip hop has really actually, it still is a voice for First Nations young people. Like they still find that thread through so much of the music, and now are creating like amazing recordings themselves. Like my ex was doing something with Baker Boy and really, sort of top-notch stuff. And I'm there going and finding a real Australian voice within hip-hop, which is always, for me, the thing that's been missing when artists here tried to do it. Like they were copying everything that, African-American culture was saying, down to the type of cars that they were driving. And I'm like, hold on a second, we don't have that type of car here. So it's interesting that now it's found this full circle moment where it's being used again as a voice to speak from the ground and out, and to create change, and hopefully create the same sort of change that it's assisted African-American people in creating in their own country. Not saying it's perfect at all, or doesn't have many strands, but it's just been interesting in terms of the way that it's worked with our cultures here on this land.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And it's not fixed in a particular time or place, and it moves, and it's like any good arts practice, it's open to all. And I think the academic you mentioned before, Chiara Minestrelli, perhaps.
I think so. I just know I listened to her at the Four Seasons conference a couple of years ago, and I was like, oh my God, she's studying the club that I used to dance at. That's funny.
Yeah, and I think that, as you say, we need more and more research, but more and more understanding, so that we can understand how important practices like this are. But so for me, I mean, this helps lead into what you're doing today, and the work you've done with various arts organisations. And what I'm interested in is how you take that sense of community and the opportunity to empower others, how you take that into your work in the arts.
Yeah, so I did university very late in the picture, so when I was about 38 into my 40s, and so got a bunch of degrees, and then decided that I was going to go off and work in the arts in terms of, make my bread and butter out of an arts job in a way that I thought could sort of still place me inside arts, but make it feasible for me whilst raising babies. And so what I did was I started working for, this was during the pandemic, mind you, so very, very amiable sort of goal of getting a job in the arts industry in a pandemic. But I ended up finding Westwards, which is a literary development organisation in Western Sydney that assists people in Western Sydney with their writing goals. So it works with everyone from children and in schools, exposing them to publishers and to writers. And then there's a journey for them that if they want to pursue writing, it will take them all the way up until the publisher's door. And so I was working for them for a couple of years, which was extremely interesting and very much hands-on and in the community, and using my writing skills to actually help facilitate. It was on the ground facilitating poetry workshops and bringing poets. And I mean, one thing I love is being able to employ other artists. So bringing poets up the coast to Sydney and letting them sit in a room with a whole lot of other Western Sydney emerging writers and watching that kind of magic happen in a room, I love. I also ran lots and lots of programs like the Academy, which we were educating people on the skills that you need outside of writing to sort of negotiate the nobody knows what to do to get the book published after you've written it, or the process that you have to go through. So doing that kind of education to me is extremely valuable, because I know that myself, I did not know the how-to. So I love imparting the how-to to people these days, all the knowledge that I've gathered along the way through messing up myself. And then I was invited to go to Western Sydney University and facilitate a program for 12 months for writers from ages 16 to 30 that didn't necessarily go the university path, but still wanted to be writers. That didn't mean that they were excluded if they did come out of university, but it just meant that there was no entry point other than your writing. And so that was magnificent. So being able to actually have a cohort of 12 young Western Sydney writers from all different backgrounds, from somebody who was writing their PhD down to someone who had dropped out of university but still loved to write things about pop culture. was excellent. So being able to work with them and then facilitate them actually publishing a book where they have their name now on a piece of paper that, and let them engage with like Sydney Review of Books and all these places that are technically out of, usually out of reach for most young writers, and demystifying all of that for them. That was amazing. Not to mention getting to work under the lovely Dr. Kate Fagan and be part of her team in writing and society research at Western Sydney University, which was beautiful and sort of taught me what a wonderful team of people can do. Like, they can really make a difference.
Yeah.
For young people, they will knock down doors to help people on their journey, on their writing journey over there.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's incredible. But I mean, the real magic, and now I'm doing, now I got to work at University of Wollongong and I've got to do all kinds of stuff. But, and now I'm the communications and media person for hART, which is Australia's leading arts and social change arts organisation that just has projects all around Australia and does amazing, amazing things in terms of, they very much do what I was talking about at the beginning, which is they create projects that come out in the medium of art that is most suited to what is trying to be accomplished. So it comes out in fine art, in exhibitions, in theatre. We have a skating project at the moment that puts pro skaters in, like, they just recently did a tour around northwestern Tasmania, just to the skate parks around there, and just gave out boards and, jammed with skate jammed with kids, and had some local bands come down and play. And I mean, all of this is primary prevention, and it's primary prevention work, it's mental health work, but it's being done from a place of art, which is what I love. But I was going to say the magic of everything that I've done is really the connectivity that I've been able to produce, in terms of I get to know people. I get to know what different organisations do or what different people are interested in. And anything that, all goes into what I call my mental Rolodex. And then I'll meet somebody that is like, I really want to study blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, I've got the perfect mentor for you. And I'll hook them up. And then fireworks happen. Or I run community theatre in Campbelltown, where I am in southwest Sydney. And, if I have young people that really want to make a go out of their career, I'm able to hook them up with other theatre companies that are giving young people a go and expressing something about southwest Sydney. And then they're able to, sort of take off from there and learn from there. So to me, that's the magic of what I've been able to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, amazing stuff. I mean, you make the connections that we wouldn't necessarily see, or the opportunities we wouldn't actually know we had. I say I've been doing a lot of reflection on where my arts practice is now as a photographer, and where it started. Like, as a teenager, well, I think I was about 9 years old, and I was given a camera, and there was something about it. And then as a teenager saying, well, I like the idea of being a sports photographer. And my parents doing everything they possibly could from our little country village in England to, my dad would take me to the test match, which, I mean, there's huge privilege in going to a test match, right? But getting out of our comfort zone to do this, but then never not pursuing it because I didn't know what, how do you then move on from going to a test match and taking some photographs and then getting the prints back? And then I didn't.
How true.
I didn't go to a school where there was a dark room, and so it is. So there are so many young people out there. So the skaters in Northwest Tassie, they go to the skate park. They might not have the best boards. These days, they have they can see other. There's content online to see how others are doing it. They can learn the tricks, and there's a creative practice in that. And so many skaters, some of these famous pro skaters actually have their own arts practice and have developed it by being in those spaces together with others. So, to have someone like yourself to be able to point them in, just say, well, how about you have a chat with them over there? I mean, that sounds incredible.
Well, it's even, I think about, so I've started a little thing called Writing Black Australia, which just took, all it was intended to do was take the decolonial study that I was doing around African diasporic writers in Australia, framed within Australia. All it was designed to do is to sort of give other people access to this information on how to frame their practice and how to write as a Black writer in a way that doesn't cause harm to yourself or to others. Because I think that's something we're probably missing in terms of we've been reading books by white writers our whole entire life, and very rarely, there's almost no published Black Australian writers in terms of African diasporic. There is now, thank God, so much more in terms of First Nation writers. Amazing work. So because they haven't been published, the access to them is limited. So I made this little thing to start to give people more access, or to put it, use the internet for what it's good for, which is, putting information out there. It's also really good for connecting people. So it's amazing how often I've had people either in Australia or even in Africa write to me and go, I really want to write, or I really want to publish a book. What do I do? And I've been able to, because of my experience now, give them the steps, the real concrete steps. This is how you publish a book.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the arts industry as a whole, where you get there and go, when I was training at ATYP years and years ago, I had a really good script teacher, and he gave the class the best advice that he possibly could, which is get your friends together, put on a play, hire a theatre, and charge people for tickets. That's how you're going to work as an actor in Australia. And I was like, even today, I'm there going, that is the most sentient freaking great advice to give to young people. Don't wait for somebody to hire you. Make the thing. Most people in Australia don't realise that we are almost completely government-supported, philanthropic-supported industry. We, on the whole, don't make a whole lot of money. And as artists, we definitely don't make the money. Like writers, for instance, very few writers make their money out of writing books. And I don't think we're transparent enough about that at the beginning, where we're like, the thing that you're trying to do, you can definitely do it, but it can't be your whole entire plan.
No. So you mentioned authors, so celebrated authors, prize winners. I can think of a number, but they still have a day, up to a point, they still have a day job. Yeah.
I know. Like, I know so many that are still school teachers and are still lawyers, and they will continue to be for some time, you know, and we can only stare at the Trent Daltons of the world and go, oh my God.
This is a really important space of inquiry. I think I want to acknowledge, I mean, what you described in terms of your work, there is a decolonial aspect to it, which is so important. And, you know, so I do think that what you've described there, you know, would you be happy for me giving it that label? And it's not my place to give it that label.
No, absolutely, because I searched for a long time in terms of how to talk about this. And that seems to be the best framing that I've found so far. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, just to make a space, to make connections, and then to actually make art. That's you know, for those who otherwise would not be able to make art, or as you were saying, you know, access to the resources. So the fact that there may be a book by a particular author or a book of poetry, you know, by a poet held in a space that we don't, that a certain group of people doesn't, you know, there are, you know, people from the same cultural background don't feel they have access to. So well,
they just don't have access to it.
Right.
They just don't have access to it. So, you know, for a little bit of insight around that, when I was writing my honours thesis, I was looking for African diasporic writers in Australia. And I was looking firstly in published work. Couldn't find any except for Maxine Beneba Clark, and that was kind of all there was, really. And so I had to frame at the beginning of that thesis that I was going to go outside of what we call quote unquote good work, and I was going to find anything there was, like anything, self-published, back of the truck, you know, writing. And so I ended up finding, I literally went to Maxine Beneba Clark, I went to Candy Bowers, I went, tell me all the names that you know of all the African diasporic poets that we have, and started, you know, literally going through literary journals and finding who had been published, and going on people's websites and ordering their books that were only available on their website. But I only knew to go to their website because I had a list of names from somebody else. So it was actually quite, I mean, that's quite a decolonial thing for me to do, is to go to other people and say, can you tell me all the names of the people that you know? And I just went through these lists. I went through journals and had to search people's backgrounds if that was even available to me. Had to actually have conversations with them and try and find their stuff. But this is what I mean in terms of access. You know, it wasn't on a shelf for me to go to. Unless I had their name, I didn't know to look them up. It was in a literary journal, which I find most of those are behind paywalls, as they should be, because, you know, they have to fund themselves somehow. But I know before I studied creative writing at university, I had never heard of a literary journal.
No, right. Yeah.
And I know all the young emerging writers in Western Sydney that I've taught had never heard of a literary journal. So I would say that's an issue with access.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, what a common colonial act is to limit access.
Right.
Yeah. No. So, wow. I hadn't expected to go into this space in this conversation, but look, it's so fundamental to your own work.
Yeah. Yeah, no, very much so, because I mean, to me, even in the communications work that I do, transparency is it, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
I understand the framing of the world that we're in. I understand that controlling information and the political nature of, unfortunately, I say unfortunately, the political nature of arts organisations means that some of the things that we do are calculated because we're relying upon other bodies for funding. And that's its own kind of cakewalk. But transparency in terms of practice is probably the most decolonial act that we can do, really, because it lays bare kind of the bones of what we're doing and why we're doing it, and makes it part of the communal knowledge bank, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, if I'm hearing correctly, there's a part of your work is to make connections, to make clear the processes that we have to engage in to be able to practice what we want to practice, and extend that practice, and maybe get that practice funded or supported or patronized in some way, or just show it to the world. To have access to the cultural references, we need to do that work. But then also, and I think more importantly, is to not accept the status quo, and to actually find your own way of working within that together in order to develop new processes that actually don't necessarily have to engage with the status quo.
Oh, absolutely. And I think probably that has been one of the positive aspects of the internet in terms of empowering people to find their own audiences and their own tribes, and not making them as beholden to larger structures as they would have had to have been to remain viable or to extend their practice beyond a certain sort of financial, fiscal point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so there's a strong political element to your work, so I always sort of talk in terms of politics with a small p, but it's the everyday politics of dealing with the many moving parts in the arts and creative industries that you have to maneuver through. And this is where we're starting to go with when we're talking about authors and day jobs. It's sort of like you and I, we each have day jobs, but and they enable us to do the work we want to do, but actually they don't give us the necessary freedoms to do the things we want to do. And so within the current status quo. And so how do we find ways to not necessarily circumnavigate, but find alternative ways to work so that we can start to have more freedoms in our practices?
I mean, part of it comes from what our day jobs will tend to do, which is we have power at a point to employ people. So one thing that I've noticed in the Western Sydney movement, at least, is, and I've seen it around the country as well, as I'm, doing my comm stuff where I'm across what everybody's doing all the time, is that I've seen as soon as somebody like myself is on a panel or on a board or in any position to hire others, they make the controversial choice or they make the rebellious choice because they are consciously making space for.
Yeah.
They are conscious, as soon as they're hiring people for a panel, like I've heard some sisters go, yeah, I got all black people on the panel. What of it? And you're like, yeah, you go ahead, do that. Because they're exercising the power that they have been given.
Absolutely. And isn't that what I sit here as a white English speaking middle-aged male from a relatively privileged background, despite working class country boy that I project myself. It's all. You say you referred to them as the sisters. Well, they're just doing the same thing as aging white men in grey suits, right? That's how that's So look, once you've been given that power, but it's actually but in doing so, it is that act of decolonization and bringing diversity of voices into decision making.
Absolutely. Decision making and spaces that have been formerly sort of reserved for certain sections of society and not others, like they've been kept exclusive. Like I've got one of my girlfriends works at Sydney Opera House, and that's literally her job now, is to bring communities that have, not been at home or comfortable in a facility like Sydney Opera House. And she works with teams to change the programming. And, it's not an easy job. By any means. It's the same with the people I know at Powerhouse and other larger establishments. These are not easy jobs because we're rubbing up against a counterculture. So it's quite difficult, but they are there and they are doing the work.
I've seen. I mean, this is institutions, how they recognizing their place in society, their place in cultural production, and their relevance. And look, I think I was involved in a project with Tate, looking, going in and interrogating the Tate archive to help young people through hip hop to see how there are people from there, who can offer, or there's work. There are objects in that archive that provide cultural references that they can use to back their own art. And I think it's fundamental work. Not easy work.
No, not at all. I remember in having sort of one of those moments when reading The Black Atlantic years ago, where I was like, all we need to change is the way that we see our history and the way that we frame it, because no place is an island and no place is a bubble culturally. It's all connected to everywhere else. So exactly what you're talking about with the archive at the Tate, learning how to look at that differently in terms of you cannot pretend that these artists weren't engaging with African culture. You can't pretend that there weren't migrant labor forces and there weren't, all the things that that happen today, people in flux constantly. I think we have this real, well, I know I did growing up in Australia, had this real, this was just English culture or this was just Irish culture. Whereas now, for instance, I listen to the Australian accent and I'm like, I wonder how much of our accent is actually First Nations accent. Linguistically, I wonder how much we've rubbed off against each other in terms of the way that our accents are formed or the words that we use. And that simply just hasn't been acknowledged.
No, indeed. Absolutely not, no.
We haven't looked at it through that framing. We haven't looked at, what these people have given to us or where this came from. And I think exactly what I was talking about in terms of transparency and having those open conversations has the ability to help all of us reframe and just find our connections, which are in more place than one.
Yeah. And I guess that brings us full circle back to the work you were doing as a teenager, bringing people together in spaces where they're comfortable to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, making the space comfortable. In a previous interview, I talked about safe spaces, and Zara Sully, who we were talking, it was in the context of queer art making, and I used the term safe space, and Zara didn't really like the term safe space. So, in that any sort of queer space there should be some sort of sense of discomfort as far as Zara is concerned. And I think I've carried that with me for a few weeks now, and it really has made me think about space. So yeah, institutions shouldn't be spaces that are safe for some and not for others. They should be uncomfortable spaces where we can have those conversations.
Yeah, I love that idea of spaces being for certain things. Like, I love the art gallery idea of like, these are spaces that are for thinking and for avid conversation. And I think that's a wonderful thing. Oh, we reserve this space. And it's the same with the whole safe spaces thing. Like, you get there and go, i.e., it's ironic. There is no safe space. It's just not a thing. There is an element of risk in every single space. Let's be really honest about it. And you just get there and go, we should be able to have difficult conversations. Yeah, we should. Mm-hmm. We should be able to do that. Particularly, particularly in queer spaces, particularly in Black spaces. Like, I know in POC spaces here, we have had some fantastic conversations when we have talked about the things that are not popular or not au fait to talk about. Talking about different, talking about the issues between African Americans and people from the continent of Africa, I think is fascinating, and let's talk about it. Let's acknowledge, if we're talking decolonial, let's go all the way with it and just like be open. And I guess all of these things are fine if we are able to have good arguments or good discussions.
Yeah.
Yeah, the same as, and that's a skill.
Yeah, and being willing to listen.
Oh, goodness, yeah.
Yeah. Look, your work, the way you've described all these different projects you've worked on and continue to do, and all the great work that's happening around the work that you do. How do you make time for your own practice?
We had this conversation the other day at a women in arts leadership conversation forum for International Women's Day, and a lot of us have put down our own practice in order to facilitate other people's practice, which is probably not the greatest idea. But we are all very time poor. So, but then again, burnout was a really, really popular subject on that day as well. So I think that's probably indicative of people putting down their practice. I would say my practice at the moment, I've learned to widen that definition and what that looks like. So I do find time to write. I'm 15 minutes outside with a coffee and the birds, and I'm a nature sort of person who doesn't mow their lawn. But as a consequence, the bugs are really happy in my backyard, and I observe them every morning. But so that's part of my practice. But the other part of my practice is producing theatre voluntarily for kids and adults in the neighbourhood. That, that's part of what I love to do, because I believe it needs to exist in every community. So I do that. I guess that's it for the moment. And then I do lots of creative stuff for and with my kids.
Wonderful.
And that's, I'm very cognizant of this as this moment. And this won't be this moment forever. So I do what I can in this moment, and I'm quite happy and content to get back to me later.
Wonderful, wonderful. I think in a world where we are individualized in so many ways, and we are encouraged to economically encouraged to put ourselves first. It's a wonderful thing when people like yourself think more communally, more collaboratively, and it's not just about me, it's about us. And that's a wonderful thing, Chris.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I really, I think about, and it's weird to go, it's the way that people have lived forever, but it is the way that people have lived forever. If you go, like, for instance, where my dad's from in Tennessee, whilst it's America, it's still in the middle of the country, and the neighbours still rock up and give you a bunch of food because they've got all this food that's grown and they've got to get rid of it, or they come over to our place and because they know we've got cucumbers growing, and can we have some cucumbers? And so I'm very cognizant that we make the community that we live in. And that's something that you have to do. You won't get paid for that, but you're creating the world for yourself and others. So I think whilst it may be viewed through the window of generosity in this individually focused world, it's not. It's just taking care of the community that I and my children live in.
Yeah. Wow, I'm already feeling like we need to have a part 2 to this, a second interview for season 2, perhaps. Yeah, you're opening up more questions whilst giving some really good, solid answers. So I'll ask you one final question.
Yeah.
For today, Chris. So you said you're in Campbelltown, and you just mentioned about the community where you and your kids live, right?
Yeah.
So if in 3 words, if you could sum up your life and your work in that particular place, 3 words, what would you use?
Connected, responsible, and 2 words, easygoing.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate all your time and energy.
You're so welcome, Tim.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Connect, Curate, Create. I hope you found inspiration and insights that you can apply to your own creative work. For highlights and links, check out the show notes, and be sure to follow us on your favourite podcast player so you never miss an episode. Tune in next time as I continue to explore life and work in the arts.